I think we can start. Please invite the witnesses in. During the in-house meeting, members were asked whether they had any interest to declare. There were no interest declared, and such will be recorded. So good morning, David, and welcome. And also I would like to welcome your colleagues as well. Right, Paul? I welcome you and your colleagues. I want to give you a piece of good news. You need not come in the afternoon on Saturday. Do you mind? Because you have to distribute pamphlets to the public, and our colleagues have also to distribute their pamphlets to the public. So we will cancel the afternoon session on Saturday. But then in the morning, we will have a hearing on Chapter 2 till 1 p.m. I think we can start now. So, in relation to report number 64 of the Director of Audit, Chapter 1, I would like to welcome the Secretary and his colleagues, but I will not be introducing the colleagues to members. I understand that the Secretary has got some opening remarks, and then the Director will give us a presentation. So we thank you for the guidelines. They are contained in Jan 1 to 13. And you may want to refer to the guidelines when you give us replies and explanations, and you can always refer to Jan 1 to 13. Secretary. Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members. I would like to thank the Director of Audit for having carried out a value for money audit study on the Buildings Department's actions on unauthorized building works, and I thank the PAC for having chosen this chapter for a hearing. The government attaches great importance to building safety. The Buildings Department needs to step up its enforcement action against UBWs. This is a very important area of work in order to enhance building safety in Hong Kong. But then we can't rely on enforcement action by the Buildings Department alone to effectively resolve the problem. If owners refuse to comply with the law and the orders issued by the Buildings Department, if they do not abide by the law, then even if we increase our manpower resources in the Buildings Department, if we further step up our enforcement action, we still won't be able to resolve the problem. And so may I call upon all members of the public to abide by the law and not to erect UBWs in order to achieve the objective of promoting building safety in Hong Kong. Since 2010, the government has, through legislation enforcement and providing support to owners, and also stepping up publicity and public education, adopted this multi-pronged approach to enhance building safety. In June 2012, through legislation, the mandatory building inspection and mandatory window inspection scheme came into being. The concept is prevention is better than cure, and we hope to tackle the problem of poor maintenance of buildings at source. And we have also got the building minor works regulation, and under this regulation we've expanded the minor works control system, and also we've worked very closely with the Housing Society and the URA to provide financial and technical support to owners in relation to the maintenance and repair of buildings. And we've got an integrated scheme since 2011. This is a one-stop service for building owners, and because of the military building inspection scheme, this subsidy scheme has been expanded since 2012 to cover assistance for the military building inspection scheme. So in the long run, in order to enhance building safety, we have to cultivate a culture in Hong Kong which attaches importance to building safety. We'll continue to step up publicity and public education. We will try to involve the stakeholders. There will be publicity and education activities. There will be APIs and posters, and there will also be tailor-made publicity strategies, and there will be seminars for building owners. There will also be briefings on technical specifications for building professionals, contractors, and property management personnel, and there will also be competitions involving students. So we have also provided produced teaching kits, and we are trying to integrate this subject into the liberal studies curriculum. So we've adopted this multi-pronged approach since 2010, and we also had the Ma Tau Wai building collapse incident. As a result, members of the public have increased their awareness about the risks associated with UBWs, and as a result, there have been more public reports to the Buildings Department. The workload of the Buildings Department has risen very substantially, and because of the large number of UBWs, the Buildings Department has no alternatives but to adopt a risk-based approach and has to drop its priorities. And we have been taking enforcement action in response to reports by the members of the public and referrals from government departments. We've also carried out LSOs, large-scale operations against UBWs. In the past 5 years, the Buildings Department cleared about 200,000 or rather handled about 200,000 UBW reports. Over 80,000 removal orders have been issued, and 5,000 warnings have been issued, and over 20,000 advisory letters have been issued. And we know that there is still room for improvement concerning our work, although we've already tried very hard to take enforcement action. We'll humbly adopt the recommendations put forward by the Director of Audit. We'll try to implement the recommendations. In fact, some of the recommendations by the Director of Audit, in fact, have already been implemented within the Buildings Department. For example, we've already started to upgrade our building conditions information system, to upgrade its functions and the accuracy of the data. And we'll also continue to step up publicity and public education. And it's true that the public have become more and more aware of the risks associated with UBWs, but still, Chairman, there are owners who have disregarded the law and the importance of building safety, and they've continued to erect UBWs, or they've kept the UBWs and they've ignored warnings issued by the Buildings Department. If owners do not abide by the law, then no matter how hard the Buildings Department works, it won't be able to eradicate the problem. And so we must have the cooperation of the public and the government in order to resolve the problem of UBWs. I and my colleagues are willing to give members detailed replies, Chairman, and the Director of Buildings would like to take this opportunity to brief members on the strategy of the Buildings Department in dealing with UBWs and the Buildings Department's priorities. Thank you. Director, please. Yes, thank you. I'm going to give members a PowerPoint presentation on the priorities of the Buildings Department. Under the Buildings Department, or rather the buildings ordinance, the buildings department can issue removal orders in relation to UBWs. UBWs represents one area of our work in respect of building safety. There are other areas including dangerous buildings, old and dilapidated buildings, and also defective drainage. These are all important areas of work. We are faced with huge numbers of UBWs, but then our resources are limited, and that's why we have to devise a strategy to prioritize our tasks. For some UBWs, they are actionable, and for others, they are classified as non-actionable. So these are the two main categories of UBWs. 40 years ago, we established our UBW enforcement policy, but then there have been some changes. If UBWs pose imminent danger or obvious danger to life or property, then we need to take action as soon as possible. This has all along been our policy. And to curb the number of UBWs, we also want to act on UBWs under construction or new UBWs as early as possible. In 2011, we updated our enforcement policy, and we included the rooftop podium lane UBW. We do not take into account the risk level of these rooftop podium lane UBWs. We accord priority to these UBWs. And we, from time to time, carry out large-scale operations. And in these operations, we target certain types of UBWs. For example, UBWs on external walls or illegal rooftop structures on single staircase buildings. We hope to adopt an orderly and systematic approach to deal with UBWs of the same kind in the same building. So you can see the effectiveness of our large-scale operations. Now this one targeted UBWs on external walls, and you can see the improvement. Because of the changes to our UBW enforcement policy in 2011, at around the same time, we also started to launch LSOs on rooftop backlane structures. In recent years, the public have been very concerned about the safety of subdivided flats. And we are concerned about UBWs which cause fire hazards and structural problems. So we either issue removal orders or termination of works orders. And in fact, we take rigorous enforcement action against domestic subdivided flats in industrial buildings. The reason is that there may be industrial activities in industrial buildings, and very often dangerous goods are stored in industrial buildings. And so domestic subdivided flats in industrial buildings are very risky. As I've said just now, the Buildings Department has been adopting a multi-pronged approach to enhance building safety. Now, the minor works control system was established by enacting legislation, and owners can carry out minor works under this system. In the past 4 years, over 300,000 minor works items were completed under the minor works control system. And without the MWCS, such works would have become or might have become unauthorized building works. And we also have the mandatory building and window inspection schemes. We think that prevention is always better than cure. We hope that owners can carry out regular inspections and maintenance to maintain the buildings in a good state of repair. And also, there is a validation scheme for unauthorized signboards. And also under these schemes, we require that information on UBWs be submitted to the Buildings Department for its record and monitoring. Now here you can see the compliance rate with regard to removal orders issued over the past 14 years. The blue bars represent the number of removal orders issued annually, and the red curve represents the number of removal orders that have not been complied with. In the past few years in Hong Kong, there were major incidents on building safety, and on each occasion, the Buildings Department needed to carry out investigation and take follow-up action. And of course, such processes were time-consuming, but still, we accord top priority to investigating and following up on these major incidents because these are important incidents in relation to building safety. Now we have different support and assistance schemes to owners. Some provide financial assistance, some technical support. In fact, since 2002, we have had social work teams in our department providing counseling and other forms of support to affected owners. We also attach great importance to publicity and public education. We try to disseminate the message to the community that owners are responsible for building safety. We also hope to instill this concept among our young people. The Buildings Department faces a number of challenges. We have a large number of buildings. There are about 41,000 existing buildings in Hong Kong, and these buildings are rapidly aging. Although there were large-scale operations in the past decade, still we have a large number of UBWs. As the Secretary has pointed out, the building safety culture in Hong Kong is rather weak. Owners have little safety awareness and in old buildings, there is insufficient or lack of building management. So these are major challenges, and we really need to have more public support and participation. We need to join hands with the public to resolve the problem of building safety in Hong Kong. Thank you. The leading member for this hearing is Mr. Paul Chair. And Paul will speak first, and he will be given 15 minutes. Yes, Chairman, thank you. I think we have to admit that the Buildings Department has been updating its strategies and policies to tackle UBWs. But we can see the number of problems identified in the report. For example, weak public awareness and also the UBW culture in Hong Kong. The policy has been changed and updated on a number of occasions. Before 1975, there was no UBW policy. After 1975, there was a UBW policy. And the policy has been updated on a number of occasions. And so there are many problems associated with pre-1975 buildings. And in 1988, in 2001, in 2011, there were changes to the UBW policy, and as a result, the strategy of the BD also changed.
Now in paragraph 2.6, sorry, maybe I can start by asking about resources. We see in para 2.7, the owner the Audit Commission asked for information, but the Buildings Department was unable to supply the breakdown of resources used for removal. Why is that? Will it be the secretary or the director? The director. The Buildings Department has different departments and groups that handle this matter. We deploy certain personnel for certain tasks to deal with UBWs, and this is difficult. Now, as I showed in the PowerPoint, we mentioned the relationship between building safety and UBWs. Now, if building safety is the biggest set, UBW is part of that. Let me give an example. Earlier, some canopies fell down, and earlier this year in North Point, and the structure canopy or support structure for an air conditioner fell down. So we're not dealing with a UBW issue, but it has a lot to do with building safety. It's the part of the work of the buildings unit. We have division into areas. Each colleague is responsible for an area, so he deals with all the matters in that area. So maybe he receives a report today about canopy, and in the afternoon he may receive another report of UBW, and he has to investigate. So whatever the nature of the report or whatever large-scale operation, he may not be dealing with just an UBW issue. So if you want us to calculate a percentage of the personnel engaged in UBWs, now actually we try to do that. We asked different groups, they gave us different figures. Now when the time has changed, 2 or 3 months later, the figure changes. So we feel that rather we would give a figure on the number of personnel you engaged in building safety within the buildings unit. Now, he didn't answer the question. Well, of course, he explained the difficulty, but from a law enforcement issue, it's rather unsatisfactory deployment of resources because we would like to have an idea of the proportion. Now, we can see in the table concerned that your department has increased in resources in some years. Now, for instance, in 2001 to 02 to 2006 to 07, it was 839 million, and then 06, 07 to 11, 12, that's 830 million and so on. And totally almost $3 billion. But we see that the effectiveness has fallen. For instance, in the early period, there was if you look at the period 2011 to 14, there was the number was 11,000 odd. So even though you added the resources, there has been a decrease. So you now have an opportunity to explain why is it that you spend so much more and yet the effectiveness has decreased. Now in Table 1 it says we have figures on the additional funding for UBW enforcement actions and enhancing building safety. Now in the two earlier periods, that is 0102 stage, it's true that most of the funding is for removing UBWs. And how are the resources used? During those days, we took on a large number of contract non-civil servant staff, and we also did some outsourcing. So if you look at Table 2, during that 12-year period, there were a large number of removals of UBWs. Now, then we faced a changing of the picture. The non-civil service contract staff left their jobs, and then we have new funding, we have new resources, we have some reinstatement of civil servant positions, and that has been the change since 2011 to 12. Now, as for the last period, 2001 to 2015, $1.261 billion. Now we see that the funding is mainly used for minor works control scheme. So they are not removing the UBWs. They are monitoring the over 300,000 applications under the minor works control scheme. They have to do all the checking and so on. Now, the 2011 there was a checking of the numbers, and it doesn't have to do a lot to do with removal of UBWs, but of course it helps us to set the removal policy. Now, the mandatory building check scheme, now that is of course to monitor the works carried out by the building owners, and it also doesn't have directly to do with the removal of UBWs. So we look at the chart in the past 14 years. There have been ups and downs during the period, and I can explain. From 2001 to 2010, during those 10 years, one large-scale operation is to remove the UBWs on external walls, and I've shown you the photos, the effectiveness. Now, at this point, I'd like to invite members. Can you tell me which year was that photo? It's a large-scale operation of the effects compared to what it was before, but it was not dated. Was it a photo of the actual what happened during the operation? Can you give us the date later? Yes, it's Jan 19. But that doesn't have a year. Now, very often the buildings department provides us with photos. Now, if we have the time the photo is taken, that would be helpful. We can provide the time. Please go ahead. In Jan 19, we listed several examples of removal of UBWs on external walls. Now, if you look at the first one, you can see that on the outer wall, it was full of UBWs before removal. And then after enforcement action, the situation is as shown on the right-hand side picture. And as Mr. Chair pointed out, the effectiveness was substantial at that time. And when we deal with one single building, we achieve a lot within a limited period of time. If we look at the second photo, now that is a photo at a street corner. And at the same time, there were many iron or metal cage-like structures. After the removal, the cages disappeared and the walls look clean. Now, let me give some background. Now, if the external structures on the outer walls fall down, somebody might be hurt. So that was an important direction of our efforts. Now, also the metal cages on the outer walls and those cages in between the two buildings. Now, and then you can see on the right-hand side, after the removal, the UBWs disappeared. Now, what I'm trying to say, in those 10 years, 2001 to 2010, through such large-scale operations, we removed a large number of UBWs. But after 2011, firstly, we have been dealing with the more difficult cases. The cooperative owners have already removed their UBWs. Those left are the more difficult cases. Maybe they didn't want to do it or they can't. Now we need more time. And also after 2011, there have been new types of UBWs. As I said, podium and rooftop UBWs. Prior to 2011, we didn't have to deal with those, and later we did, and we issued a large number of removal orders in respect of these rooftop and podium UBWs. And very often people live in such UBWs, whether it's on a podium or on rooftop. So when we enforce the law, we encounter more resistance. And after 2011, the second category of UBWs that we enforce against are the subdivided flats, and we have difficulty starting from the investigation stage. And even after we issue the removal orders, we encounter a lot of resistance. So that reflects, to a certain extent, that in the second chart, the relatively lower effectiveness in that period. And as I mentioned, during the 12 years of funding, now thereafter, the non-civil servant staff gradually left, and the posts have not been immediately filled. And also some civil servant positions were reopened, but after recruitment, it still takes a period of time. It's a slow process. In the past 5 years, we have almost new 500 new civil servant positions. Over 400 of them were in respect of positions previously filled by contract staff, non-civil servant staff, and then they reapplied. Now, well, when they left their posts, their work was not filled was not taken up, and some of it might be taken up by civil servant staff. And then when the new incumbent arrives, he has to be instructed and so on. So in the past 3 or 4 years, the manpower change has added to the difficulty. Of course, we try to step up the training so that the new colleagues can be adjusted to the work as quickly as possible. And as the PowerPoint showed, now since the collapse of the Mata Wai incident in 2011, now the society has been concerned about building safety, subdivided flats, how renovation works can be done safely. Now, since that collapse incident, we have conducted a quick check of buildings over 40 years old in Hong Kong when we established the of the 50 years old, and we have found that there have been 40 such buildings, and we have then issued orders for repairs and maintenance, and there have been 4,000 of them. And these special actions did take up a number of the time of a number of our staff who have been transferred to those tasks. We hope that the administration can provide some answers. Now, the director mentioned that in 2011 has been a decrease in the number of non-civil servant staff, however, in the next few years, there have been an increase in funding of $1.2 billion, and then there has been a change in policy. Now, the workload has been increased, funding has been increased, and yet the manpower deployed has decreased. So is that a major shortcoming in your arrangements? The director? Now, in the work arrangement, we take a step-by-step basis. As I mentioned, the 10-year provisional funding, now it's true that it came to an end in 2012. Now, at the time, the approach we adopted was that if the non-civil servant staff did not leave on his own accord, basically we keep it. That is, we keep some additional staff to handle the work. Now, the new funding from 2011 up to the present, now a large part of that is not to directly deal with the UBWs. As I said, it covers MWBS, the mandatory check of building structure and windows. And now let us be a bit more specific. We expended more resources, and yet, and also we seem to have be targeting more areas. So whether it's the Development Bureau or your department, now your vision has increased, your commitment has increased, and you have underestimated on the resources and capabilities of your manpower. And because of the large-scale operations and new work objectives, the level of effectiveness has declined. So maybe you have been too much of a rush since 2011. Or maybe your goals have been too grand and you have underestimated your difficulties. The director, now in 2011, there has been a policy change It started out because of the Pt1 incident. Now we conducted a review of building safety. Now the multi-pronged measures that we mentioned was to deal with that. Law enforcement is only one part of that. So in the past few years, we also introduced legislation to deal with that. Now, as in 2011 up to 2013, and now in the past we didn't provide or we didn't talk so much about assistance to the owners and the publicity. Now that's the real key part to promoting building safety. Now, in terms of manpower deployment, we look at the resources available to set our priorities. Now, when it comes to these major incidents, now also the fire in Mao Tau Wai Road, the collapse of a canopy in Yau Tong, there's another fire, and several cases this year, like the explosion at the garage at Wong Tai Sin. Buildings department are getting involved. The colleagues were originally handling UBWs in that area, but these are building safety issues. They have to follow those up. Now, on the Wong Tai Sin case, we are still handling some emergency works, and it has been 10 odd days now. Our staff are already conducting some assessment on the site. Only a couple of days ago were the occupants able to re-enter the building to get some stuff. So there's a lot of work, and we try to establish the priorities where the urgency is considered to be greater. Now, in the past few years, in our workflow, we try to enhance and streamline the procedures. We keep trying to do that. Now, from what the director said, now every few years we see a recurrence of these unexpected incidents. Now, shouldn't you arrange for certain staff to deal with such incidents? Otherwise, you have a disruption in your manpower plans.
Thank you, Chairman. Director, sorry. Secretary, if you want to answer questions, just raise your hand. So just let us know if you need to, Secretary, for example, make a response to policy issues. Just raise your hand. Director, okay, please continue. Yes. In paragraph 2.7a, there's the mention that from 2011 to 2014, the manpower breakdown for the division. And so we talk about professional and technical staff from 474 to 576 in April 2014. So these staff are there to carry out inspections, issue notices, and handle building safety work. And because of the large number of buildings we are handling, there are 41,000 buildings involved, and so our staff are divided into teams to inspect or to address issues in various districts. Under the current establishment, we really don't have much room for emergency teams to tackle, emergency accidents. Like in the industrial building in Chinwan, the subdivided flats in Chinwan recently. In that district, well, usually there should be 3 people, from the senior surveyor to a surveying officer. So there could be a team of at least 2 people to inspect the building. But because doing the law enforcement action and the challenges involved, we need to actually get staff from outside to help them. In the past 3 to 4 months, those who are directly involved in the team actually numbered more than 12, and some of the staff are actually sourced from other teams. In recent weeks, we need also to get staff from other divisions to help with our work. Particularly to tackle the recent accident. We need to inspect whether the environment is safe enough for people to get into a building that was sealed off. Personally, I feel that really our staff actually have worked way over time. So under the current establishment, really there are times when actually an emergency case occurs. We need to make special arrangements. I hope that there could be standby teams, so they will be available when there's a need to get the help. But it's not likely that that could be the case. Okay, Paul, another question. Okay, because of time, in 2011, after the change of policy then, well, you have the rooftop, lanes, podiums, and yards concerns. And in Annex B, you can see that Appendix B, there's a chart on the number of unauthorized building works, in up to 16,000 buildings, in areas like lanes, podiums, rooftops, and so forth. So on your statistics on the number of buildings they can tackle each year, that is 200. That means that comes to the figure of 80 years before you can remove all the buildings with UBWs. So given this, have you considered whether there are better options in dealing with these issues? Director? In actually Appendix B, that is the suspected UBWs identified in 2011 stock-taking exercise. And rooftop number, roof lanes, podiums, and so forth, and they number 47,000. And that was a number that was arrived at after the 2012 stock-taking exercise. So this actually came before the change in policy. And I'd also like to mention that under the Buildings Ordinance, the Buildings Department is authorized to issue removal orders for these UBWs. Also under the same ordinance, the department can exercise its discretionary power. In other words, we don't have to issue removal order for each single UBW. If you look at the stock-taking exercise, the biggest number actually comes to $2.3 million, including small canopies, racks for air conditioners, and so forth. So theoretically speaking, all these tiny structures are UBWs, like supporting structures for all these little machines and equipment. So we can put aside some UBWs and see whether when there's change in policy and manpower, then we can deal with them at a later stage. So we can just work on what needs to be worked on now and put aside other UBWs, types of UBWs. So there could be up to 50,000 illegal structures on rooftops, podiums, and so forth. The size of the problem is big. And this actually are information derived from our stock-taking exercise, and it also shows us what we can do, how we should deal with these UBWs. All along, we have been making plans, and for the rooftops, podiums, UBWs there, in 2005, there was a change in policy. and then there was this warning notices or advisory warning notices that we could issue. That is when we identified any UBWs, and we found that these UBWs are better not dealt with by removal orders, then we will instead issue the demolition warning notices to give the homeowners time to remove them. If the homeowners do not comply, then we would put this in the land registry, put the letter in the land registry. For these illegal structures, since 2005, till the change in policy in 2011, we have issued, on the basis of UBWs on rooftops and podiums, up to 26,000 such warning letters. So in other words, of the 50,000 odd UBWs involved, quite a number of them have been issued the warning notices. What's the advantage of doing this? Or the result of doing this? That is, if this property involved is to change hands, then lawyers can, through checking the information, find out about the warning letters associated with the property. After the change in policy in 2011, we began to take enforcement actions by way of the removal orders. Even though we don't have the figures with me, but we actually did come across quite a large number of UBWs, and we use internal guidelines to actually prioritize our work, so we can deal with some UBWs on rooftops and podiums first. And we also consider that for rooftops and podiums, we'll tackle them floor by floor. Many years ago, if you wanted to take action on the rooftop, if there were 4 4 flats on the rooftop, if there was a complaint against A, then we'll address the issue in the flat A, leaving the other flats alone. But such approach was problematic because after flat A got the notice, and there were actually complaints. And after 2011, we changed our approach. Once we receive a notice of UBW on flat A, for example, we will also inspect whether there are similar structures at the other flats on the same floor. And if we found that there were, then we would deal with them in one go. So once we receive an alert on an UBW, and if we find that there's another UBW in a neighboring flat, we could take action. And in one case, we issued 24 warning notices on the same podium, involving all the flats on the same podium. So in dealing with UBWs and acting on complaints or notices about these UBWs, we want to adopt an approach that allows us to effectively handle more UBWs in one operation. But we understand that the whole number, the entire number, is big. But we do prioritize. We need to prioritize so that we can assess better. That is, if we didn't take an enforcement action, then whether the dangers could be posed by certain UBWs. If there's immediate danger, then we must take action. Okay, Permanent Secretary, Mr. Chow. Yes, as for the enforcement policy, Mr. Paul Chair's observation is correct. Once we have expanded the area that needs prioritization, then the Buildings Department would deal with the cases before demolition orders were issued. But in enforcement, we shouldn't just look at, how much manpower resources there are available. I think for the sake of public safety, we need to adjust our policy. Of course, we try to narrow the scope of work that needs to be taken urgently. But we shouldn't just go for narrowing the scope of work alone. As we said earlier, even if there was no immediate danger, we do hope that through public education we can enhance public awareness of demolishing, even the less immediately dangerous structures. We have actually taken some cases to court, and we try to get more publicity on the penalty imposed by courts on homeowners who did not comply with the requirement, so that homeowners would be made better aware of their responsibilities. And also going back to Mr. Chair's first question, that is the manpower of buildings department. Why can't we have a clear idea of how many people will be responsible for clearance? In the past, many owners in corporation were dissatisfied that the buildings department carried inspection on UBW, on the flat occasionally, and then after they've demolished some structures, and then the buildings department want them again of another structure on the same building, and they need to erect scaffolding again. So we hope to have the buildings department look at the entire building, so that whenever there's a need for repair, we hope that the staff can actually group together all the structures that need to be dealt with, instead of actually asking the same building to carry repair work again and again at different times. So there are staff who not just deal with the UBWs, but also signboards and small works, and that could help with the work involved. Well, okay, now I've heard many reasons for difficulties and in actually enforcing the law. And you know that it would take us more than 30 years to clear all the UBWs. Have you considered, that it's not up to you when to enforce a law? That's not something that should happen in a civil society. Would you consider, like when we dealt with corruption in the past, that is, we can try to, for example, try to clear up the backlog first by announcing amnesty, because you don't have the resources to clear all the UBWs in one go anyway, and we don't want to leave any blemish, in the enforcement. Okay, I think we will make this point in our report. So, is there any response? Is there a possibility for amnesty, special amnesty? Well, I think from the policy, I think I need to draw a line here. It's very difficult for them to answer you whether there can be an amnesty. But if you'd like to answer, go ahead. But if you need more time to consider that, then because this really involves policy. Well, Chairman, if you can recall, Member Lau Shaoxing had subcommittee, and in which they discussed the proposal of, asking people with UBWs to give a waiver fee. But our policy is, if it's illegal, it's illegal. It shouldn't that because you give a waiver fee, then you can be exempted from being asked to show the responsibility. So our policy, as we said, would not, consider that sort of approach. Okay, next one. I think before questions are asked, the director, you can try to answer members' questions. You told us a lot about the history, but that will only cause us to ask you more questions. So please focus on them. It wouldn't be fair to you. First, keep asking you. If you want to explain, try to be concise in your answers. When you try to explain things. Paragraph 2.7. I think, on the issue in 2.7, have you actually answered that? I know every of your staff works 8 to 10 hours a day, but you must know, whether they are working on UBWs or not. You need to actually allocate the right resources. Sometimes you said you couldn't answer the questions, but because you might get confused at times, because Paul was asking you about the allocation of resources, and yet there's also appendix chart in the chart that shows, the allocation of resources. So there are resources allocated throughout the years, and there are resources there, and yet you can't just not directly answer, the questions. No matter how difficult it is, you need to give us your direct answers. You can't just say, you can't, or you don't have enough resources. That alone cannot be an answer. Everyone knows how much time is supposed to be spent on what. So, as legislators, we do need to monitor whether you've done the job well or not. You can't just say, oh, this is something so complicated, so we can't give you the answer. You can't say that. Otherwise, we wouldn't need to ask you that, all sorts of questions. Next one. Chen Head Ken. Paul, please stay here. We need to have a quorum. Okay, on the policy on handling UBWs, can I ask the witness to pay attention to page 11, paragraph 2.9, proof on 1.6 and 2.22. So now I'll begin my questions.
Chairman, in Hong Kong, there are many UBWs, and I believe we all understand that they can't be eliminated or removed overnight. And as a result, the Buildings Department really needs to set priorities. So there are actionable and non-actionable UBWs. These are the two broad categories. It is true that the UBW enforcement policy has changed a few times over the years, but we still have these two broad categories, actionable and non-actionable UBWs. There is no clear definition concerning actionable UBWs, and in some cases, there are even double standards. For example, actionable UBWs are those which pose imminent or obvious danger, and also UBWs under construction or new UBWs. And I understand that they also remove or take action against UBWs which can easily be dealt with. Now, in reply to a question raised by the Director of Audit, the Buildings Department said that for the remaining of the UBWs, they were not dealt with because they were more difficult cases to handle. So can I ask the Buildings Department whether the level of difficulty in dealing with a UBW is one of the factors you take into account, apart from imminent risks to public safety and UBWs. So is it that the Buildings Department can exercise some discretion within the policy? Is it that your policy doesn't really allow you to do what you want to do, and you are also suffering from manpower constraints? Chairman, I would like to refer members to Gen 15. All right, perhaps you can answer the question first, and then you can refer to Gen 15. Yes, Chairman. As to whether we deal with the easier cases first and then the more difficult ones, may I refer to paragraph 2.9b. Enforcement actions on the remaining UBWs were relatively difficult to be taken. Now, I want to say that this is the result. In other words, in the past decade, we mainly dealt with UBWs on external walls, and they were relatively easier to handle. And now we are there are still UBWs in the interior of buildings, and they are more difficult to take enforcement action against. So it is not that we chose the easier cases to work on first. And concerning actionable and non-actionable UBWs, they are part of our enforcement policy. There are some UBWs which have to be dealt with urgently, and there are some UBWs which we will not deal with for the time being. And may I refer to Gen 15? It explains the 2011 policy. You can see that there are 4 paragraphs, and towards the end of the second paragraph, you can see the actionable UBWs. So there are 8 categories of UBWs. And some of them obviously involve professional judgment. For example, items constituting obvious hazard or imminent danger to life or property. Now, which types of UBWs fall within this category? We do have internal guidelines. Now, for example, when when there are fire safety hazards, or when there are structural risks. And also Gen 15, category B, new items. New items, irrespective of the date of completion of the building where such items have been carried out. And in fact, we do have internal guidelines explaining or defining what is meant by new items. Now, UBWs are under construction. Of course, these are new items. And then UBWs reconstructed. UBWs that were removed in a formal operation but were reconstructed. And then we have photographic records. And there are about 600,000 items in the repository. And so if we can look at whether the items in fact are in our photographic records, and if they aren't in our photographic records, they are also considered new items. Mr. Chen. Chairman, the department doesn't have the number of actionable UBWs, and we don't have figures concerning new items and so on and so forth. So it seems that the director doesn't agree that it deals with, or the department deals with the easier cases first and then the more difficult cases. And can you give us an example of a difficult case which posed imminent and obvious danger and which was worked on? All right, can you explain to us your 2011 policy? Now, previously, the policy was to deal with UBWs with opposing imminent and obvious risks, and so we want to know more about your 2011 policy, because you changed the policy in 2011. Yes, Chairman. Perhaps I can highlight the salient points in our 2011 policy. Under the policy, we have LSOs, and in fact, that's item G in Gen 15. Previously, there were no LSOs OWs. Previously, we worked on the UBWs individually, but then in 2011, we included LSOs for target buildings in the policy. And so under LSOs, when we deal with UBWs on external walls, we can deal with all of them in the same building. I want to say that the operations were relatively easy when compared with the difficult ones, but then they were also very difficult operations. For UBWs on external walls, they can be very dangerous because of wear and tear. Now, for example, previously there were rusty iron cages on many buildings. They were very dangerous, but now we no longer see them. Now, recently we've carried out an operation in a Pt1 industrial building against subdivided flats. The UBWs are new, they are risky, and the case is a difficult one. So all three criteria are met in this case. And we've ultimately got 2 removal orders, and we have been able to clear the area. Now, previously, in an old building, we might need 50 removal orders for 50 different UBWs. But in this case, in Pt1, only 2 removal orders are necessary. Mr. Chen, I thank the director for the hard work and also the hard work of the department in dealing with UBWs. May I refer to Para 2.2? It says that there are many UBWs in single staircase buildings which have not been removed. And we are told that some are sensitive cases and some are being dealt with in the courts. And it is said that some cases involve emotional owners or occupants. So I think this reply by the Buildings Department shows that the Buildings Department prefers to deal with the easier cases first, and the more difficult cases are deferred. For example, because there are these emotional occupants or owners, you have decided to defer your action. And I think these cases are bad examples for other affected owners or occupants. They know that if they behave in an emotional manner, then the Buildings Department will defer the operation. But then you have declared that your policy is to deal with new UBWs and UBWs which pose imminent and obvious danger. But it seems that the Buildings Department will defer its operation when the occupants or owners are emotional. It may not be a bad thing, Mr. Chen, for the government to adopt a people-based or people-oriented approach. Yes, in fact, for single staircase buildings, an operation was mounted in 2001, and till April this year, we've dealt with a total of 5,792 single staircase buildings involving 13,000 UBWs. The report mentioned 33 buildings. That was the figure in February. In April, the figure was 31. I want to say that, in fact, we have encountered a lot of challenges concerning the 5,000 odd cases involving single staircase buildings. Many of the occupants and owners were emotional, but we were able to carry out the operations over the past decade, social workers stepped in to assist, and we were able to remove the illegal rooftop structures. For the remaining 31 single staircase buildings, there are many reasons for our not having been able to complete our enforcement operations. But I want to say that for all the 31 buildings, the rooftop occupants have already received removal orders. But for some of the rooftop structures, there are legal actions going on. For example, prosecution action, appeals, and so on and so forth. And in some cases, the owners and the occupants had some personal difficulties or problems. Some of them behaved in an emotional manner. Some of the owners or occupants were old, 70 or 80 years old or over. And for some of the cases, the owners or occupants were prosecuted when they were young, but then when we decided to, when they decided that we might have to take prosecution action again, we hesitated as to whether we should really bring the occupants or the owners to court. Mr. Chan, I've got 2 more questions. Yes, you can continue if you like. I want to talk about the effectiveness of the BD's enforcement action against UBWs. I want to refer to Para 2.16, Chairman. Para 2.16. Chairman. According to the Department of Audit, the Buildings Department has not given a breakdown concerning the number of UBWs removed each year, how many are actionable, how many are non-actionable. And according to the Buildings Department, the breakdown the breakdown is unlikely to be of public concern. And the Buildings Department has also said that the breakdown is not a good indicator for assessing the effectiveness of the BD's enforcement action. But then, if you can't give us a figure on the number of actionable UBWs removed annually, how can we assess whether you have been effective in your operations, whether you've overshot your target, or whether you've not been able to attain your target? Chairman, according to the Buildings Department's policy, we have actionable UBWs and non-actionable ones. For non-actionable ones, we do not take action against them for the time being. We may take action against them in the future. Now, I want to say that some owners are willing to remove the UBWs themselves. And of course, such numbers will be recorded. And then there are some UBWs on podia. And then there are some building works which are maybe unauthorized, but then they may under the minor works control system replace all their existing air conditioning frames with new ones. Now, concerning actionable versus non-actionable UBWs, a breakdown is not as meaningful as the total number of UBWs removed in a year. Under the 2011 enforcement policy, there are 8 categories. Yes, you've already told us that. I want to say that for new items, now, because the situation keeps evolving and changing, it is impossible to say how many new items there are at a particular point in time. So you are trying to tell us that the situation keeps evolving, and UBW, which is non-actionable today, may become actionable tomorrow, and then there are owners who remove the UBWs themselves. So is that your explanation for Mr. Chen? I think you've already provided half the explanation for me, but we can't really accept your explanation. I think you have to tell us why you are adopting this approach and the difficulties that you face. I think it's good public education to tell the public that under the MWCS, dangerous items may become non-dangerous items. Mr. Chen. Chairman, I think it would be better if you could really reply on behalf of the director. Yes, I think the permanent secretary can supplement. Yes, Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chen may have in mind something like a freezing survey. A freezing survey, say, by the Urban Council, by the Lands Department, can be completed, say, within a day's time. But then for UBWs, the situation keeps changing. So maybe today there is a survey or an inspection, and maybe tomorrow there is a new item. And also there are some UBWs which are inside flats, and unless you can gain entry into the flats, you won't be able to discover those UBWs. So we can't tell most of the public how many actionable UBWs there are today, for example.
Now, if you have to get an order for every case, then it would be a big nuisance to the public. Chairman, why is it that we have to get two sets of figures? Because there is a distinction. For instance, if you remove an UBW in a fire exit, that has to do with people's lives and property. Now, that has some difference compared with a signboard on an external wall, but still it's just a figure, one item that still counts as one item. You want to show the priorities. You don't just give us one figure for the removals, and we don't see the priority, the actionable and the unactionable. Now, on search warrant, of course, we don't apply for search warrants at any and all times. Now, when we did the legislation, we talked about that. Now, in special cases, there are grounds, and the court grants the warrant, so we get the warrant. So that's the picture. A simple answer. Now, if the UBW was removed after receiving our removal order, it's something that is actionable because we can only issue a removal order for an actionable item. So that's a simple way to make the distinction. Now, in some cases, there were removal orders, but you didn't do it, and so there is some danger remaining until the person, the new owner, buys the unit. Mr. Liu, now I have heard the Director of Buildings for half an hour or an hour and a half. Now I express my sympathy because he doesn't have the manpower, he doesn't have enough money, it's very difficult to carry out the work in such a situation. So the PS, Mr. Chow Tat-ming, says that's why we need publicity and education. But if the education is not effective, if people do not listen, now the Chief Secretary, she used to be the Development Bureau Secretary, and at that time she said it very clearly. She said that we must enforce the law. There mustn't be an amnesty. We mustn't let the rich people go free. Now, for the members of the public who don't have UBWs, that's a very welcome saying. Now, if you have UBW at the rooftop and you have a glass house and then somebody else sees it and he gets very angry because he doesn't have those, but the other person is enjoying all these UBWs. Now, of course, we're talking about building safety, fire safety. So those members of the public who don't have UBWs, they will feel upset. Now, the Secretary gave us a 10-minute speech of 1,600 characters long. He didn't repeat what Mrs. Carrie Lam said, but having heard Mr. Chow Tat-ming, I think the policy has not changed. Now, no amnesty, one has to enforce the law, and yet you do not give the Director of Buildings the money and the personnel required, then it's just empty talk. Now, Chairman, I understand that the PAC doesn't deal with policy, but talking about value for money, it must be on the basis of the policy announced by the government. Now, we have allocated funding. If you look at Table 1, now in 0102 to 0607, during that period, the funding allocated for UBW enforcement was $839 million. In 0607 to 2011-12, for that period, it's $830 million. In 2011-12 to the current year, that is 14-15, the financial year just passed, it's as much as $1.261 billion. Now, from the point of view of value for money, and having heard the policy pronounced since Mrs. Carrie Lam, now the truth is you haven't been able to produce the results. Now, if we talk about value for money, we are looking at the outcome, the effect. Now, if you look at one of the figures, it says that it will take 80 years to complete all the works required, now, or the removals required. So this is a very difficult question for the Director of Buildings. Now we have the Secretary for Development. He has to tell us, you have pronounced a policy. We see the outcome of what you've done. In the past 10-odd years, we have been allocating billions of dollars. Now, Mr. Secretary, will you try to assist the director of buildings. Now, they don't have the money or the manpower, so they can only set priorities to deal whichever is more urgent. Now, if there's a building collapse or there's an explosion, then you deploy the manpower for that. But the policy pronounced since the days of Mrs. Carrie Lam, the policy adopted by you has not changed. Please tell the PAC how will you assist the Director of Buildings. Can you tell us about the current policy and allocation of resources? I thank the Chairman and Mr. Alan Leong for his question. Now, first, in the past few years, now within Development Bureau, we have worked hard to try to get the resources for the Buildings Department, and the resources have increased significantly, even though compared with the volume of work of the Buildings Department, the increase has not completely met their needs. But if you look at the table, you see that the resources have increased. Now, as for the number of positions, there has been an increase. In the past 5 years, over 500 new posts, the increase of about 50%. And we also asked the Buildings Department, as mentioned just now, to streamline their procedures, to be more focused. Now, the Director, in responding to Mr. Paul Chair, said that there have been impromptu happenings, major accidents that people didn't want to see, and there have to be follow-up and investigation, and that has affected their work because it requires a lot of resources. In the coming days, we will continue to try to get the resources they need. At the same time, we hope to step up publicity and education so that society understands the problems caused by UBWs, especially safety problems and fire safety problems. We hope that's the way to resolve the problem at the root. Chairman, the administration comes to LegCo for funding. When it does that, it's on the basis of the policy it has pronounced. Now, if you come to get funding, and as I said earlier, you didn't have it before 75, and then in 75 you have actionable and non-actionable. In 2011, there are 7 categories of actionable items, and then you have the minor works control scheme, and then in 2011, the 3rd category out of those 7, that is the rooftop podium, light well, and rear lane, UBWs, whether they are risky or nuisance, you want them all to be removed. Now, these are your policies, and we have allocated funding. And now the audit shows that you haven't been able to complete the works required. Now, in particular, in 2011 to 12, the stock taking shows there were 229,000 cases of suspected UBWs, but there was no categorization for keeping of records. Now, I'd like to ask, the government comes for funding, and substantial amounts have been obtained. Now, for instance, $19 million in 2011, and that's almost $20 million by the computer records. So why is it that you were unable to tell us which were for actionable items and which were non-actionable, and you have no record? Now, so you get the funding on the basis of your policy, but the fact is you haven't been able to achieve the policy. Now, out of the 292,000 cases, how many of those are actionable? How many are non-actionable? Now, from a point of perspective of value for money, how do you justify that? Perhaps the director can explain. Now, Chairman, I believe Mr. Leong said that $21 million was used for the stock taking. Now, it's a figure on the suspected UBWs. There was a rough categorization in our report in Appendix 6. It listed the rough categorization of the 300,000 cases. In our records, we know which UBWs are of which building. Now, as for the 230,000 figure, we do have the records. 990,000, those are the support structures for air conditioners, the smaller items. And the data for our stock taking helps us to carry out law enforcement. We have a document, Jan 17. Now, after the stock taking, we conducted a review. In July last year, we completed it, and we set certain policies on the basis of the outcome of the findings of the stock taking, and that has contributed to our work. Alan? Or perhaps you can, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Director, you can brief us on Jan 17. Now, in the stock taking, we took the suspected UBWs on the external walls of buildings, and in the past we saw these metal cages. Now that has increased, and we have now seen smaller items, air conditioner support structures, and clothes racks, and so on. And that adds to 190,000. Now, when we did the review in 2010, it also confirmed that we have been effective in the previous decade. Now, in the stock taking, we also took a large number of photos. This shows that during the course of the operation in 2011 to 12, the situation of the buildings. Now, these photos helped us in our enforcement action. I invite you to look at Jan 18. There are some pictures. Now, those photos were taken during the stock taking exercise. You haven't answered Mr. Leong's question. Maybe I can ask Mr. Leong to put his question again to see if you can answer. Now let me talk about the effects of the stock taking. Now, apart from identifying some highly dangerous UBWs, we found that those have decreased, and also we found that the older the building, the larger the number of UBWs on average. Now, the building age, the distribution of the building ages related to to our mandatory building inspection scheme. Now, through that inspection scheme, we have been able to deal with the UBW issues in relation to the older buildings. Now, we can see that the large-scale operations were effective in removing a large number of UBWs. In the removing exercise, we see that in the stock taking exercise, we see that on average there are about 10 to 20 UBWs per building, and during that exercise, a large number of UBWs were removed. So as a result, we make some proposals. We try to introduce some legislation so that we can cover more UBWs in the MWCS, under the MWCS scheme. Now, the photos have helped us in our prosecution, because we can see there are 4,000 reports a year. It's very effort demanding. We have to send out our staff in each case, so the photos help us. Take a look at the first photo in Gen 18. Now, there are two photos, an upper one and a lower one. The upper one was taken during the stock taking. It was dated 18th of July 2011. You can see the situation of the rooftop of the building. The lower photo is a recent report. Now, the parts encircled in red, you can see that in May 2011 there's nothing. Now, this photo enables us to make sure that the UBW was a new one, and we can take enforcement action on that.
So this is the tool that we can get from the stock taking. So, Director, can you answer the member's question that, concerning your work not meeting the outcome expected, but your answer really didn't really address the question. Well, Mr. Liang, but of course I don't doubt that the Director of Buildings did work, but say in this picture, Gen 18, 19, all these pictures are proof of the work that he had done. But the question is, the government policy, well, actually it was the basis on which the government asked us for money. And you're saying that you do respect the spirit of law, and you understand about the importance of building safety, fire safety. But look, Appendix B, 2011, the stock taking. The suspected UBWs, the number stands at 300,000, involving 28,600 buildings. Looking at the progress now, and the fact that there is a decrease in the number of contract civil service staff, and occasionally we've actually seen, unfortunate incidents like the fire at Garden Street, and also the blast at the garage in Wong Tai Sin lately. All these incidents, of course, also took staff from the buildings department to handle the emergency situations there. So that means made me wonder, how long do we have to wait before, the public dissatisfaction with UBWs will be gone? When can we not see any more tragedies happening resulting from, risky buildings or fire hazards? I don't know where this is making things difficult for the Director, but I don't think I got an answer from you. So officials responsible for policy, the secretary said one thing, and the director yet doesn't have any money nor manpower. So we don't see any effect from the policy. In terms of value for money, there's no way we can judge, because he couldn't tell us, or directly answer us, how he decided on whether to take actions against UBWs on the roofs or in the lanes. And you just kept telling us, well, public education is important. You hope that the public would just demolish those illegal structures voluntarily. Or that you just said, you hope that there could be cases, successful cases or court cases that can be widely publicized to alert people against having illegal structures and to make people aware of the need to remove UBWs. But what we've seen so far is all the, your action taken so far are really not useful. Unless, the owner has to sell a flat, then any court actions taken or warnings issued would have deterrent effect. But in some cases, the court ruling was just that, the ruling was made, and yet the structure could still be there, and the homeowners could, incorporate the penalties into the, cost of owning the UBW. We have invested actually hundreds of millions of dollars into addressing UBWs throughout the years, and yet we haven't seen any successful outcome. In terms of value for money, I'm sure you fail in that regard, because we haven't seen any really outcome at all from the policy. Maybe the secretary can persuade us not to make such a conclusion on, in terms of value for money. You may try to convince us that of the more than $1 billion obtained from the government, you had a lot done still. But I haven't heard any convincing answers yet. I can't see when we can clear the problem that the UBWs would be replaced. Secretary, let me supplement. I think, firstly, you heard from the director his explanations about the work that his department had done. You can see that the staff of buildings department had worked very hard. It's not that they didn't, they tried to get away with any of the work that needs to be done. And over the past few years, within our bureau, upon the request from the buildings department for more resources, we did allocate additional resources. In terms of staff, for example, there have been a 15 decrease in staff, and in 2015, under the civil service establishment, there will be an additional 150 staff allocated to the department. So in the past few years, there have been an increase in resources, and yet I can say that the increase in resources cannot be unlimited. I hope members can understand. For the government as a whole, there's a lot of work facing us. So within buildings department, there needs to be the policy to set priorities. And during the process, as I said in the opening remark, the Audit Commission's recommendations, we will take them aboard and try to do as much as we can and follow up on those recommendations. But I do hope that you can understand, for UBWs and in the work dealing with them, we're talking about a large number of structures. For the stock taking, which found out more than 2 million illegal structures, and of them more than 1.9 million UBWs are not actionable, and neither are the remaining lot. But once we've got the information, that actually would help the staff in setting priorities, and also helps them better focus on what needs to be tackled first. I hope members can understand that As we mentioned earlier, in the last electrical term, in the development panel, there was a subcommittee on building safety, and the subcommittee report, paragraph 33, made the point that, let me quote it. It says that because of the possible strong reaction from the society against the demolition of legal structures, this committee would suggest that the government should be flexible in taking enforcement actions. If there are some long-term UBWs that are proven safe, the government could consider registered such BOWs or UBWs. So we do follow the policy from the safety perspective in particular. And we need to take action on those structures that are the most dangerous. We need to work according to our priorities. But as for the situation that I just quoted, because of the resource constraint and because of concern about public reactions, we do need to put some UBWs at the bottom of the priority list. Okay, Chairman, just then the paragraph 33 that he mentioned was never made part of the government policy. Of course, LegCo did make the point, the subcommittee did make that point, but then that wasn't part of the government policy. Now, in terms of value for money, in 2011 April, you said back then that as long as the UBWs are on the rooftops, in the lanes or podiums, no matter where they pose serious hazard or not or cause a nuisance to the environment, they will be demolished. So if you say that, well, if you think that that is too much upon too much, you can restate it. Then, if you make a new policy, we would judge your value for money on the basis of your new policy. That's what the Director of Audit would do, because they would actually measure the value for money on the basis of the pronounced policy, government policy. The Audit Commission did carry out its evaluation or make conclusions based on the existing policy. So the paragraph 33 just read out by the Secretary was of no help, because that wasn't part of government policy. The government policy is that, particularly the policy dating back to April 2011, without repeating here, about the UBWs in the rooftops, podiums, yards, lanes, and so forth. And also of these structures constituting a serious hazard or a serious environmental nuisance. It's been more than 4 years now since that policy was announced. Since the announcement of the policy, it seems that the objective wasn't reached, and yet LegCo had kept giving you the money. So my question is, what have we got so far? Secretary, let me try to respond simply. Thank you, Ellen Liang, for pointing out the issue. Of course, we do have the policy. That's our goal. But, Chairman, in trying to reach that goal, my colleagues have worked very hard, and we try to work as much as we can on the basis of resources available. And just then the Director told you various scenarios, and also the large number of buildings involved, and also some emergency cases that needed immediate attention. So when it comes to value for money, of course, you can look at whether we reached the objective intended by a policy, and also how much time is needed to reach the goal of the policy. And you can also look at it from perspective that, with the resources available, whether we have made good use of them. That is within the constraints available, whether we've tried to do our best. Secretary, could you explain to us this way then? Since the implementation of the policy and with the goal there, can you tell us how the constraining resources affect achieving the goal? And you do have an executive, for example, in Gen 1 to 13, they are practice guidelines. Have you, at the departmental level, as Mr. Alan Liang mentioned, like for rooftops, lanes, yards, and so forth, for those structures, have you tried to carry out or enforce the law in those areas? And in the stock taking in 2012, 2.3 million UPWs. That is from 2011 to 12, with the mandatory building inspection schemes, minor works policy. How all those have helped solve the problem? Can you just give us some concrete data? Because we need to look at the data to judge whether, there's good value for money. We sat on PECs before, and we need to know what really went on to help us write the report, the final report. Do you understand what I was trying to say? You must have the data. Small works, for example, of the 2 million UPWs. How many of them were small works? You may not have handled all the BWs and the lanes and rooftops, but you did get resources. Have you tried to actually help taken actions in accordance with the relevant laws? I know, but I'm just trying to, tell you what we need to know. Can you try to answer Mr. Liang's question, focusing on the issue of value for money? If you have information, you need to let us know. If you don't give us information, we can't write the report. Director? Yes, I understand Mr. Liang's question comes out of the new policy in 2011 that actually incorporated the policy on dealing with UPWs on rooftops and podiums and so forth. Okay, let me tell you, since the policy was enacted, how many such UPWs we've tackled. Based on the stock taking, we tackled about 47,000 such UPWs on rooftops, podiums, lanes, and yards. In 2011 to 2014, in the past 4 years, altogether we issued demolition orders to 18,000 UPWs in those areas, a percentage of 40%. Among them, 11,000 UPWs on rooftops, podiums, and so forth have been demolished, constituting 1/4 of the total 47,000 UPWs. So those are actual figures. Let me clarify that it's not because of the limited resources and the heavy workload or the redeployment of staff that we did not take any action against UPWs on rooftops, podiums, and so forth. On the contrary, we tried to, in line with the new policy, took actions. But the new policy did not stipulate an exact date, a period during which we have to remove all the UPWs. Back in 2011, the policy set very clear goals. But even that, given the figures I just given you, we managed to deal with 40% of the UPWs involved. That is more than 1/4 of the structures. So looking at it from that perspective, it shows that we have been moving in the right direction. Thank you. Alan. Okay, Chairman, based on what the director said, that in 40 years they dealt with 1/4 of the worst, does it mean that it will take 16 years to handle all? Is that your estimate? That is from 2010, October 2010, when the new policy was announced. So counting from April 2011, the implementation date, does it mean that it will be by 2027 when we can deal with all the 47,000 UBWs on rooftops, podiums, in yards and lanes? Is that right? Yeah, Chairman. In erect or removing UBWs, it's difficult to calculate on the basis of figures alone because there are a lot of factors that can affect how the demolition orders are implemented. That's why when we have better public education, when more homeowners are aware of their responsibilities, we've seen examples of homeowners after receiving warning letters or demolition orders, they will take action immediately. For total clearance of these UBWs, I can't tell you the figures, but by the end of 2014, our departmental staff have stabilized. So for each position that's available, whether it's a civil service job or non-civil service contract job, all those postings have been filled. So compared to 2-3 years ago, that's a big improvement. We think that having a stable team can allow us to work according to plan. The demolition of UBWs, well, I'll give you a list of figures, but let me show you the overall picture.
講到喺
Figure 2, removal of UBWs. The red line represents the number of UBWs removed. In 2012, the number was only about 13,000. It was on the low side, but then the number picked up. In 2014, the figure rose. And this year, in the controlling officer's report, the target number is 27,000. Many removal orders have been issued. We need to clear them as quickly as possible. This we understand. And so we are deploying more of our staff members to clear removal orders issued. So in 2011, you laid down certain targets, but then those targets could not have been achieved. And in 2011, for UBWs which posed risk or UBWs which did not pose risk, you laid down targets, but then you took action on the dangerous ones first. I think although you have a policy, you have to make sure that you're not causing too much nuisance to owners and occupants. So, Mr. Leung, is this the essence of your questions and remarks? Chairman, of course, that's the right spirit. But I think we're going to look at one case, case 1. So a complaint was made in August 2006, and then a removal order September 2014. And then the Buildings Department decided not to take any action against the UBW. I believe we're going to deal with this case in detail later. Chairman, you've proposed an approach, but then that cannot be regarded as a reply from the Buildings Department, and I don't know whether the department endorses such an approach. All right, so perhaps, Secretary, if you do not need to give a reply, we can have a 15-minute break. Do you wish to reply now? Would there be a review? As the Permanent Secretary has pointed out, Chairman, the policy has not been adjusted for quite some time. And so in the light of the Director of Audit's recommendations and members' comments, we will consider the need for a review at an appropriate time. All right, let's have a 15-minute break, and we will resume at 20 minutes past 11.